What if you're a slave, and you need to obey a white man to keep you alive? While working, you hear rumors that slaves are now free, so you escape and run toward the swamps. Suddenly, while hiding, welcome to What a Story. Peter, his wife Dodienne, and their children were all slaves on a cotton farm in 1863. When he finds out he has been sold to a new owner, he spends his final moments with his family in prayer before the white men arrive and haul him away, disregarding the cries of the kids. Get back, boy! Peter tries to resist the men's hold by yelling and squirming, but when they point a gun at Dodienne, Peter immediately stops and agrees to board the cart on his own 2 feet. Sadly, the men seek retribution and strike him before pulling him again. Through the cage bars, where Peter and several other slave people are being transferred, Peter vows his children to return for them one day, as they try to run after him in tears. They travel long before reaching their new job site, a railroad being built. The living circumstances are 100 times worse than on the plantations. Skulls of the slaves who dared to rebel are displayed at the door as a warning. They sleep in cages, and even when they work hard, they won't think twice before hitting and abusing them. They use the Bible to justify their behavior, which worsens the situation. Many ferocious dogs are also in the area, sent after slave people attempting to flee. If a slave disobeys, they may receive a whipping, a shot in the middle of the field, or even a brand on the face from the master, vassal. Harrington and Knowles, who was also purchased as a slave, but was chosen to join the guards due to their hunting prowess, are the 2 men Vassal retains as his right hands. Peter tries his best to act appropriately, but is reprimanded even when he tries to assist Gordon after he falls. One evening, after all the slaves have been returned to their cages, they witness John being tossed inside while squirming in discomfort due to the pain in his cheek. Thomas, a slave, is shaking in terror, and Peter tries to reassure him by telling him to think of his loved ones. He also offers him the message of God, who continually keeps watching over them, but John mocks him because it is evident that no God cares about them. Yet instead of responding to the jeer, Peter maintains his composure and assures John that he will pray for him. Later, Peter overhears 2 white guards discussing essential information that Lincoln has liberated the slaves, and those who have managed to flee are now rushing to Baton Rouge for assistance. The talk is abruptly cut off when the guard realizes Thomas messed up with the meal, and is about to punish him. But Peter defends Thomas, saying he's just a kid, and that's why he shouldn't be punished. The guard punches him before pulling out his gun, and preparing to shoot Peter, but Vassal stops him. Vassal approaches him later, and claims that Peter is now his dog, but Peter responds that if Vassal is his God and he is his dog, then he ought to be given the same meat as the dogs. Vassal laughs. But the next day, he ties Peter up and forces him to kneel before him, as his dog barks at Peter. During lunch, Peter informs the other slaves about Lincoln and Baton Rouge, which they may reach after 5 days of swamp walking. Because it's difficult to survive in the wetlands, some of the slaves are reluctant, but when Peter says they probably won't survive here either, he wins over a few guys. They only need to wait for the appropriate moment to flee. Later, when a slave was working, he passed away, and the guards made Peter bring him to the pit where they threw all the dead together. Several white deserters are supposed to be excavating, but as soon as they see Peter, they suggest a black man should do it instead, so Peter takes a shovel to fill up the trench. Peter decides that this is the ideal opportunity to carry out his plan, so he waits patiently for the guards to get preoccupied with an explosion on the field, before leaping on them to murder them with the shovel, and take a knife before fleeing. As soon as the other slaves notice this, they seize the opportunity to begin running as well, striking a few guards along the way, which gives John a chance to steal a pistol. The runners are shot as soon as other guards raise the alert, murdering as many as possible before getting lost in the woods. Even though Fassel also engages in some shooting, he orders Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs to pursue Peter since he doesn't like that he got away. Peter forms an ally with 3 of his pals, and he leads them through the jungle by keeping an eye out for any looming hazards. The squad eventually locates the wetlands, and for the most part, the crossing is straightforward. However, Thomas stops when he sees the crocodiles, which causes the dogs to overtake him. When the dogs have caused enough damage, Fassel summons them back and asks the slave where they are heading. Thomas declines to respond, so Fassel responds by making a deal. In exchange for Thomas telling him where the others are running, he'll let him go. Thomas, who is scared, admits what he knows and is allowed to enter the swamp, but as soon as he turns around, Fassel kills him and lets the crocodiles eat him. Peter, John, and Gordon complete crossing the swamp. Peter advises them to take the other path, but John won't listen to instructions and chooses to follow the horse trail instead. Gordon wants to follow Peter wherever he goes, but Peter thinks that if they separate, it would be difficult to find them. As a result, Gordon makes his path through the woods after Peter urges him to listen for the sound of Lincoln's cannons. Peter then starts going his own way but soon realizes his leg is bleeding since a gunshot hit him. He needs to run for a bit to put some space between himself and Fassel. Peter discovers a white family's home shortly after that, which also has slaves. Peter first takes a vine from a tree, and ties it around his injury like a tourniquet before slipping away and hiding behind a stack of logs. This allows him to reach for water from the pump, and notice the clothes hanging on a rope. After taking a shirt from the family's garden, Peter flees into the forest, but one of the kids catches him and rings a bell to alert the others. Fassel hears it and follows the noise, where the residents inform him of Peter's location. Peter moves as quickly as he can, barely pausing to use the shirt he stole to bind his wound. Later, he pulls the bloodied shirt off, and drops it in a trunk for the dogs to locate while he ducks beneath the water of the swamp. Fassel and his men fall for the strategy, and proceed down the road thinking Peter has crossed the swamp, but he emerges after the group has left. Suddenly, a crocodile decides to attack him, but Peter reacts quickly. He knocks it away with a thick branch and knife. Dodienne awakens at that same time from a nightmare in which she had seen her spouse in peril. The children also awaken and worry for their father, but Dodienne assures them he is alive. When night arrives, Peter hides atop a tree and uses his knife to cut the swamp leeches off his body. As Fassel and his men discover the dead crocodile and open it, they find it empty, proving that Peter managed to escape them. The group decides to camp for the night and feast on the crocodile, which prompts Harrington to genuinely commend Peter for his expertise. As soon as he does, Fassel reprimands and reminds him of his father's lesson: if you give black people even a tiny bit, they'll want more and steal things like their jobs and properties. Peter keeps running, and keeps his body coated in dirt and animal waste, which attracts flies but also masks his scent. When he has to traverse another marsh, he remembers his family and prays to his Lord. He takes the sun suddenly shining on him as a sign. Peter is fortunate to come upon an abandoned treehouse with clean water and some leftover food, as Fassel divides his squad to cover more area. Peter utilizes some nearby hot coals to heat up his knife and cauterize his leg wound. Later, he places the coals on the empty bucket and transports it with him, as he climbs a tree to throw smoke at a beehive, which causes the bees to flee and enables Peter to collect some honey. A snake also houses a boat in the treehouse, so Peter carefully moves it with a branch before hopping in, and taking off while savoring the honey. As Fassel notices the smoke, he starts riding toward it, but Peter has already left. Dodienne's master comes up to her and informs her that she has been sold, and will be gone in 2 days. She cannot bring her kids since her new master will arrange a new spouse. Dodienne makes an extreme decision to prevent being sold, since the news dramatically saddens her. She approaches one of the cotton machines, and pretends to get caught in an accident by putting her hand inside. Meanwhile, Fassel found the tree house because of his dog's smell. He is also able to follow Peter as he crosses the river by keeping track of his movement. Peter rushes to enter the woods, where he is startled to run across John again. Peter assures John that he is not being followed and shows him how to disguise his smell, but John ignores him before they resume their run. They quickly rush to hide when they hear the dogs barking. John climbs to the top of a tree while Peter enters an empty trunk. The dogs are able to track down John, thanks to his smell, making it simple for Fassel and his men to locate him. John declines to get down, so Fassel shoots him, then demands information on Peter by using force, but John still won't answer. To send a message back to camp, Fassel takes his head, and offers it to Harrington and Knowles. Peter closes his eyes so he won't have to see his friend die, and offers a prayer for John's soul. When it starts to rain, Peter gets out of the tree, after waiting a few hours to put some space between himself and Fassel. He struggles to keep moving while grieving, but suddenly, he notices many horses passing by, one of which is on fire. Peter discovers a home on a plantation in the direction they came from, but everything is on fire, and all the white people are dead. It appears that the local slaves were aware of the news from Lincoln, and decided to take matters into their own hands. Peter enters the home with his knife ready just in case. At that point, he dives right into the food and wine to satisfy his hungry body. He keeps going and doesn't stop, until he hears an odd noise coming from above. He then investigates the sounds, and eventually finds a dying girl trapped beneath a harp, which she is playing as a call to rescue. Peter steps in to save her right away, takes her outdoors, and lays her down on a table before attempting to get some water. Though terrified, the girl forces him to stay as she hands him her cross pendant. Peter accepts it, knowing what she needs, and offers a prayer, assuring her that God is with her. As Harrington approaches, Peter is so preoccupied that he doesn't hear him coming, until it's too late. Peter must put down his knife and back away from the girl to avoid being shot. After leaving the girl, she immediately dies, and Peter is so enraged that he aggressively turns around and murders Harrington. Knowles also comes then, but Peter reacts quickly and takes Harrington's gun to shoot him. Knowles tries to convince Peter that a person who can kill a crocodile may be admitted into Fassel's army, but Peter calls him the worst among them, and leaves him to perish. Because of the dogs barking, Peter chooses to go into the cotton fields for safety, after hearing Fassel approaching. As the dog gets too close, he kills it. When Fassel finds the dead dog, he becomes even more motivated to find Peter. The following day, Peter lands at a beach covered with the remains of white men who perished in battles with Lincoln soldiers. In the distance, Peter can see the ships and hear the cannons indicating Lincoln's men are nearby. Excited by the prospect of achieving freedom, Peter runs once more, when a horse suddenly arrives by his side and knocks him to the ground. It is Fassel. Fassel wants Peter to beg for some of the meat he had requested back in the cage. Peter won't comply, so Fassel reminds him that he is his god and pulls out a revolver. But, before he can fire, someone else shoots Fassel first. Peter informs Fassel that he is not a god, before turning to meet his rescuers, native Lincoln's Guard under Lieutenant Caillou. The soldiers carry Peter to the medical tent at their camp in Baton Rouge, when his body finally gives in to tiredness and hunger. The nun nurse makes Peter rest due to the infection in his leg wound, and for a few days, Peter doesn't do anything. After Peter feels better, he goes to one of the soldiers to acquire his new documents as a free man, albeit he has to make up specific details like his age that he is unsure about. The white troops are taking advantage of the fact that the slaves are technically stolen contraband, and allowing them to labor on the federal fields or join the army, so he isn't yet permitted to go and look for his family. Peter declines continuing to obey commands, but when the soldier explains that enlisting in the army will enable him to liberate himself permanently, and rescue his family, Peter agrees. Later, Peter learns that Gordon has also been located by the army. He is wounded but still alive. Next, Peter visits Lou for his outfit, but first he's asked if he'd be interested in supporting a cause by posing for a photograph. Lou assures Peter that the white photographers are harmless and have good intentions despite his reservations. It turns out that these men are documenting the realities of slavery to inform the public. Peter consents to expose the scars from countless whippings by exposing his naked back to the camera. Peter is then brought to the general's office, where the general queries him about his knowledge of the railroad the enemy is constructing. The general looks at Peter's photo once he has finished sharing all his information, and remarks that the scars indicate disobedience, which is a bad trait for an army member to possess. Peter stands up for himself, saying that even though he has scars from several beatings, he has never given up fighting, which is crucial for a soldier. Lou leads Peter and all of his troops to the front lines at first light, where he delivers an emotional speech reminding them that they are fighting for freedom. While they are still moving, several soldiers succumb to enemy fire, but the group seems unfazed and immediately enters the fray. Soon, a fire surrounds them everywhere, an explosion hits, knocking Peter out for a short while, leaving him unconscious in the mud. Immediately after, he awakens. He drags his tired body through the mud to continue helping, firing at the enemy whenever possible, and praying for each dying companion he sees along the path. Amidst the conflict, Lou is killed, and Peter discovers Gordon is also hurt. Seeing his buddy in such agony and terror prompts him to emerge from his hiding place, and go toward the enemy lines. His goal is to halt the cannons, and by acting as an example for the other troops and taking his lead, the native guard is able to defeat their adversaries and win the day. Following the end of the conflict, the army goes to every plantation to release the slaves. Everyone is shocked and unable to believe the news when they first arrive at the home where Peter used to work. Once they realize liberation is genuine, elation quickly replaces their astonishment and disbelief. After seeing his old master's death at the hands of justice, Peter starts hunting for his family, and nearly breaks down when he cannot locate them. But as he starts to pray silently, he turns to look at his side and lets God lead him to his wife and children, who come running to hug him. The image of the real Peter went on to become an iconic piece of history. Almost 400,000 black individuals were able to flee for freedom as a result of Lincoln's proclamation. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next story.